I need to tell you about the night my husband sat across from me at our kitchen table and said words that I did not know how to fit inside any version of the life I thought we were living. It was a Tuesday, ordinary in every way. We had eaten dinner, washed the dishes, he had made tea. I remember that detail very clearly, the tea, because it is such a domestic, careful thing to do before destroying someone's understanding of the last 11 years. He sat down. He put both hands flat on the table, and he looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not guilt exactly. Something older than guilt, something that had been living behind his eyes for a very long time and had finally grown too large to stay hidden. "Sarah," he said, "there is something I have to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago. I want to say I knew something was coming, that some instinct stirred. But honestly, I didn't." I looked at him across our kitchen table, in our home, in our ordinary Tuesday night life, and I had absolutely no idea what was about to change. And then he told me. Joel and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party when I was 28. He was quiet in a room full of noise, which I found interesting. He was standing near the window, drink in hand, watching the room with a kind of patient amusement rather than participating in it. When our host introduced us, he shook my hand and said, "I have heard good things about you," in a way that was entirely sincere, not a line. I found out later he had been through a difficult few years before we met. He didn't talk about it much, not because he was evasive, but because he was the kind of person who had processed his difficult things internally, filed them away, and gotten on with living. He mentioned a relationship that had ended badly, a period of time he described vaguely as being lost. He had come through it, he said, and he seemed to mean it. He was kind. He was steady. He had a dry wit that appeared at unexpected moments and made me laugh harder than I expected. He was the kind of person who remembered what you had said 3 weeks ago and asked about it, who noticed when you were tired before you admitted it, who showed up consistently, without drama, in the way that matters most. We dated for 2 years. We moved in together. We got married in a small ceremony in the garden of his parents' house in Vermont, 30 people, afternoon light, more laughing than crying, 7 years of marriage. Not perfect. We argued about money sometimes, about priorities, about the small frictions that accumulate in any shared life. But underneath the friction was something solid, something I trusted. I thought I knew the full shape of him. I had no idea there was a room in that shape I had never been shown. In the weeks before that Tuesday, something had been different about Joel. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could name with precision. He was quieter than usual, and he was already a quiet man, so the difference was subtle. A certain quality of distraction, long silences that felt occupied rather than empty. He slept poorly. I noticed, but I put it down to work stress. He had been under a lot of pressure at his firm that quarter, and I did not push. I wish, in retrospect, that I had asked. But then, perhaps it would not have made a difference. Because what happened was not gradual. It arrived all at once on a Tuesday at a kitchen table. Later, much later, after everything, he told me what had finally broken the dam. He had been at his firm's annual retreat the previous weekend. One of his colleagues, a man named Greg, who had worked with Joel for 6 years, had had a health scare the week before. A heart incident, not serious as it turned out, but frightening enough. And Greg, who was also a private, contained kind of man, had sat with Joel on the last evening of the retreat and said something simple. He said, "I keep thinking about the things I haven't said to the people I love. It's a strange feeling, realizing that you have been waiting for the right moment, and the right moment was always just now." Joel had driven home the next day with those words sitting in the passenger seat beside him, and by Tuesday, they had done their work. He put the tea on the table. He sat down, and he told me something he had been carrying since long before he knew my name. 11 years before that Tuesday, 4 years before he and I had even met, Joel had been in a relationship with a woman named Anna. They had been together for 3 years. It had ended, he said, in the way of things that end slowly and then all at once, not a single event, but an accumulation of incompatibilities that had finally become undeniable. But the ending itself was not what he had to confess. What he had to confess was something he had done during that relationship, something that had happened toward the end when things between them were already fracturing and he had been, in his own words, frightened and selfish and 27 years old in all the worst ways. Anna had a younger brother named Cole. Cole had been Joel's friend, or had become one naturally through the years of the relationship. They had spent time together, watched football, been part of the same loose group of friends. Joel had liked him. He had been easy to like, younger by 4 years, good-natured, and possessed of the particular trusting quality of someone who has not yet had reason to stop trusting. And Joel had betrayed that trust, not in a way the world would call dramatic. No crime, no violence, but a betrayal of the quiet, corrosive kind that does damage precisely because it is invisible. Cole had confided something in Joel, something private, a financial difficulty, a mistake he had made that he was ashamed of, a secret he had asked Joel to keep. And Joel, frightened about his relationship with Anna, trying to explain his own behavior in ways that cast the least shadow on himself, had used what Cole had told him, had turned it into a piece of information that shifted attention, that redirected a difficult conversation that protected Joel at the cost of Cole's dignity. Cole had found out. The friendship ended. The relationship with Anna ended shortly after. Joel had lived with it since. I sat across from him and I listened to all of this without speaking. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. He looked at me, and what was in his face was not a request for absolution. It was just the face of a man who has finally put something down after carrying it for 11 years. Exhausted, exposed, entirely at my mercy. "Why are you telling me this now?" I said. "Because I have been telling myself for 11 years that it was long enough ago to not matter," he said. "And I don't believe that anymore. It happened. I did it. And you are my wife, and you have spent 7 years trusting me, and you deserve to know the kind of person I have also been." I did not respond that night. I told him I needed time. He nodded as if he had expected that, as if he had rehearsed being told to wait, and had decided in advance that waiting was what he deserved. I went to bed. He slept on the couch without being asked. I heard him moving quietly in the kitchen at some point, and then it was silent. I lay in the dark and did something I had not done in years. I thought about who I had believed Joel to be, and I placed what he had just told me beside that image, and I looked at both of them. Here is what I found, in the dark and the quiet of that night. What he had done was wrong. There was no softening that. He had used another person's vulnerability to protect himself. A young man who had trusted him had been betrayed, and the consequences of that had rippled outward in ways Joel had never fully faced. But he had told me. Not because he was cornered, not because I had found something or someone had exposed him. He had told me voluntarily, on a Tuesday night, because a friend's health scare had reminded him that the right moment is always now. He had sat across from me and handed me something that could have destroyed our marriage, chosen truth over safety, and then waited. That was not the act of a man without conscience. It was the act of a man who had spent 11 years being ashamed of himself and had finally decided that shame carried in secret helps no one, least of all the people you love. By morning, I knew what I needed to do next. Not about Joel and me, that was a longer conversation, but about Cole. I asked Joel if he knew where Cole was now. He did. They had a mutual contact, enough to track him down. I told Joel that if he wanted to move forward with me, with himself, the confession could not end at our kitchen table. It needed to go where it belonged, to Cole. Joel wrote to Cole, a letter, physical, handwritten, the kind of thing that requires you to slow down and mean every word. He did not ask me to read it before he sent it. But he told me what was in it, the full account, no self-justification, no softening of what he had done or why. A direct apology, an acknowledgement of what it had cost Cole. No request for forgiveness, he was careful about that. He did not write the letter in order to feel better. He wrote it because Cole deserved to have it. We did not know if Cole would respond. He did. 3 weeks later, a short reply. Not warm, it was not that kind of letter, but honest. Cole wrote that he had spent years being angry about what had happened, that it had affected his relationship with his sister Anna and with the group of friends they had shared, that he had moved on, mostly, but that the moving on had required him to carry something he had never asked for. And then he wrote something that neither Joel nor I expected. He wrote, "I appreciate that you wrote. I didn't think you ever would. It doesn't undo anything, but it matters that you did it anyway." Joel read that letter at our kitchen table, the same table, and cried in a way I had not seen him cry before. Not with relief, exactly, with something more complicated. The grief of understanding, fully, what 11 years of silence had actually cost. Not just Cole, himself. We went to therapy after that. Not because our marriage was broken, it wasn't, or not in the way I had feared, but because what the confession had opened was a real conversation about honesty, about the stories we tell ourselves to avoid confronting the things we are ashamed of, about what it means to be truly known by another person. It was the hardest 6 months of our marriage. It was also, strangely, the most honest. Karma in this story did not arrive as punishment. Joel was not ruined. He was not publicly exposed. He did not lose his job or his reputation or the life he had built. What he lost was the comfort of the story he had been telling himself, that it was long ago enough to not matter, that silence was the same as resolution, that a thing not spoken is a thing not real. And what karma gave him, gave us, in exchange for that loss, was something more durable, a marriage built on the full truth of each other. Not the curated version, not the best self version, the actual version, with its shadows and its regrets and its moments of weakness that have been named and owned and carried in the open instead of buried in the dark. I think about Greg sometimes, Joel's colleague who had the health scare. The man who said, without knowing it, exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment to someone who needed to hear it. We do not always know which of our ordinary words will shake something loose in another person. We do not always know when a sentence spoken at the end of a long retreat weekend will travel home in a car and sit quietly for 3 days and then walk into a kitchen on a Tuesday night and change 2 lives. Words carry further than we think. Truth, when it finally arrives, carries the furthest of all. I am not telling you this story to say that confession always saves things. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the truth arrives, and what it finds is not strong enough to hold it. And that is real, and that is valid, and that is its own kind of story. But I am telling you this because I believe that the weight of an unspoken truth is borne by everyone in the room, even by those who don't know it is there, even by those who trust you completely, even by you, quietly, every day. And I believe that the moment the right one arrives, that ordinary Tuesday, that cup of tea, that two hands placed flat on a table, it changes everything. Not always into something easy, but always into something real. This has been Soul Tales. My name is Sara, and on a Tuesday night that began like any other, my husband told me the truth, and I am still deciding every day that I am glad he did.